They say silence can be louder than words. Maybe that's why her quiet has stayed with me all this time. Why I hear it still, long after the moment passed. It was late afternoon when she walked into the shop, the kind of light where dust hangs in the air and you notice how small things move slower, like the turning of a wrench, the scrape of a stool across the floor. I'd been fixing the starter on an old sedan, grease up to my elbows, when the door chimed and I looked up. She didn't belong there, not in a place that smelled of oil and steel. She carried herself differently, straight-backed, purposeful, dressed in a navy coat that looked more at home in an office than under the fluorescent hum of a repair shop. Mid-40s, maybe, but with that kind of presence that made age feel irrelevant. Not beauty in the obvious sense, but in the way she didn't flinch at the noise, didn't apologize for taking up space. "Do you do walk-ins?" she asked. Her voice was steady, low, and it cut through the clatter. "Depends what's broken," I said, wiping my hands on a rag that would never be clean again. Her eyes flicked to the car outside, a silver hatchback, parked a little crooked, engine ticking from the drive over. "It stalls. Randomly. And I can't have it happen again." The way she paused on that word, again, made me glance at her longer than I should have. She caught it too, because she straightened her shoulders like she'd just said more than she intended. I told her to pull it into the bay. She did, careful but with the hesitation of someone used to being judged for not knowing how machines worked. I didn't judge. If anything, I liked the silence between us while I leaned under the hood. She didn't hover like most people. She stood a few feet away, hands tucked into her coat pockets, watching but not demanding answers. Every so often I'd feel her gaze land on me, sharp at first, then softer, as if she was searching for something she hadn't yet decided she wanted to find. The problem was simple, a corroded connection near the battery. Easy to fix, nothing worth the kind of urgency she carried in with her. But I didn't tell her right away. Maybe I liked the quiet weight of her standing there, the rare kind of customer who didn't fill the air with nervous chatter. After a while, she broke it. "You're young," she said, not accusing, just observing. "Old enough to know my way around this," I replied, tapping the wrench against the metal. That made her smile, small, restrained, the kind that barely touches the mouth but lingers in the eyes. And for a second I forgot what I was supposed to be doing, caught between the sound of her quiet amusement and the fact that I'd never seen anyone wear silence like it was armor. When I finally tightened the last bolt and lowered the hood, she stepped closer. Too close for casual, not close enough to be deliberate. She handed me a folded bill, crisp and firm, but when our fingers brushed it felt like a mistake we both pretended not to notice. "Thank you," she said. Simple, final. But she didn't leave right away. She just stood there, like she might say more, something heavier, maybe personal. Then she stopped herself, slipped the keys into her coat pocket, and walked out without looking back. The door chimed again, and the shop felt emptier than before she came. I still don't know why I keep replaying the way she held back, or why the silence she left behind feels louder than the words she never said. It was raining hard that morning, the kind that drummed against the corrugated roof of the shop and blurred the world outside into gray streaks. I'd been sweeping water back toward the drains when her silver hatchback pulled up again. She stepped out with an umbrella that looked too elegant for a place like this, heels clicking against wet pavement. "You again," I said, more casual than I felt. She didn't smile this time, just folded the umbrella, smoothed her coat sleeve, and gestured toward the car. "It's doing it again." I checked under the hood, already knowing the fix had held. The battery was fine, connection secure. Still, she lingered, arms crossed, eyes skimming the shop like she wanted to be anywhere else. Not impatient, guarded, like she didn't want to admit she needed help again. While I tested the engine, I stole small glances at her. The way she tapped her thumb against her wrist, quick and restless. The faint smudge beneath her eyes, like she hadn't slept much. She looked tired, not just from the car. "It's running fine," I said eventually, raising my voice over the hum of the rain. No stall this time. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, though she masked it by adjusting her coat. Maybe it's me, then. Maybe I imagined it. The words came out softer than she meant them to. and for the first time she looked at me without the armor. Just for a second, eyes a little glassy, lips pressed too tight. A crack in whatever wall she carried around. I didn't know what to say, so I handed her a rag when she brushed rain from her hands, though she hadn't touched anything dirty. She accepted it anyway, her fingers brushing mine again. This time, she didn't pull away quickly. "You're observant," she murmured, folding the rag neatly before giving it back. "Just doing my job," I said, though my chest beat harder than it should have. There was a moment where the rain outside grew louder, like the world wanted to fill the silence between us. She let out a small laugh, not full, not free, more like she surprised herself with the sound. It was the kind of laugh someone makes when they forget, briefly, how heavy their day has been. I caught myself staring at her hands as she tucked her hair behind her ear. Strong, graceful, but with a faint tremor when she thought no one noticed. She must have felt my eyes on her, because she turned back toward the car abruptly. "I should go? Sorry to waste your time." "You didn't," I said quickly, too quickly. She paused at the door, umbrella already open, the rain spilling light onto her face in fractured patterns. For a breath too long, she just stood there, half turned toward me, lips parting like she might say something else. But she didn't, and when she left, all I could think about was the sound of her laugh, quiet, tired, but alive in a way that made the shop feel too empty after she was gone. It was close to closing when she showed up again. Not with the car this time. She just stepped inside the shop like she'd been walking without direction and ended up here. The storm outside had knocked the power in half the block. The only light came from a desk lamp plugged into the backup generator, throwing everything else into shadows. "You're still here," she said, almost surprised. I shrugged. "Paperwork. And the rain's not letting up." She nodded, but didn't leave. Instead, she set her umbrella against the wall and walked further in, her shoes damp, her hair clinging in loose strands around her face. She looked less polished than before, tired, but somehow more real. "Do you ever stay just to avoid going home?" she asked, her voice quieter than the rain hammering the roof. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the way she hugged her coat tighter made me hold back. So I just said, "Sometimes." We ended up sitting across from each other at the cluttered workbench, two mismatched mugs of instant coffee steaming between us. The storm rattled the bay doors, and for a while neither of us spoke. I could feel the nearness of her in the way the lamp light brushed against her cheek, how her hand lingered on the mug like she needed the warmth more than the caffeine. She asked me about the work, about whether I'd always wanted to be here. It wasn't the kind of small talk people make to pass time. She listened, really listened, in a way that made me stumble over my own words. Her eyes didn't dart away. They stayed on me, steady and searching. And then she said, "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who didn't stay." The words caught in her throat, and she looked down quickly, tracing the rim of her mug. My chest tightened. I wanted to reach across the table, to tell her she didn't have to finish the thought, that I understood even if I didn't know the story. Before I could say anything, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, and her whole body shifted, shoulders stiffening, jaw tightening. The name on the caller ID lit her face in pale blue. She silenced it without a word, turned the phone face down. The silence that followed was different, heavier, crowded with something unsaid. I thought she might tell me then, whatever secret she'd been carrying. Her lips parted, eyes flicking up to mine, and for a moment it felt like the air itself held still. I could see it, the choice balancing in her hesitation. A near confession, so close I almost leaned in just to catch it. But then she shook her head faintly, as if erasing the thought. She stood, smoothing her coat, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. "I should go," she said, almost too softly. I stayed seated, hands clenched on the mug, watching as she reached for her umbrella. She turned once more at the door, her eyes meeting mine in the flicker of the lamplight, just long enough to make me wonder what she would have said if the phone hadn't rung. And then she was gone, leaving the storm to fill the silence between us. It was a week before I saw her again. Long enough for me to wonder if maybe I'd imagined everything. The pauses, the almost words, the weight in her eyes. She came late, long after the shop had emptied, when the air carried that tired stillness of a day already over. I was locking up, keys in hand, when her car pulled up slowly at the curb. She didn't even pretend it was about the engine this time. "Am I too late?" she asked. I hesitated, then pushed the door back open. "Not if you don't mind the lights half off." Inside, the shop was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the vending machine. She lingered near the doorway, not moving further until I gestured toward the stool by the workbench. She sat, smoothing her skirt, her eyes not quite meeting mine. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I stacked invoices just to keep my hands busy, while she traced circles on the countertop with her finger. The silence stretched, thick, until it was almost unbearable. Finally, she broke it. "This isn't normal." Her voice was barely above a whisper. I looked up. "What isn't this?" She waved a hand vaguely between us, then dropped it into her lap. "I don't even know what I'm doing here." Her honesty landed heavier than any confession. It wasn't flirtation, wasn't an invitation. It was something rawer, more desperate. "You don't have to explain," I said carefully, though my throat was dry. But she shook her head. "Maybe I do. Because you're kind. Too kind. And I keep showing up, and I don't know if it's fair to you." The words caught in the air. I wanted to say it didn't matter, that I didn't care if it was fair. But my chest felt tight, caught between wanting to close the space between us and knowing I shouldn't. Instead, I said the only thing I could. "Then why do you keep coming back?" Her eyes finally lifted to mine. They held there, unblinking, searching me with a kind of ache that made it hard to breathe. She didn't answer right away. The silence between us said more than any explanation could. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked just slightly. "Because here, I can breathe." The words hung in the air, trembling, fragile. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. And in that stillness, with nothing but the clock ticking and her eyes fixed on mine, I realized there was no going back to pretending this was ordinary. She stood before I could respond, clutching her coat tight against her. At the door, she turned back once, her face pale but steady. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered, "but I'm more afraid of stopping than I am of continuing." Then she was gone, and the silence she left behind hollowed the room in a way touch never could. For a while, I thought she wouldn't come back. Days passed, then a week, and I started telling myself it was for the best. Easier to breathe when the shop was just tools and oil and silence that belonged only to me. But one evening, as I was closing early, her car rolled into the lot. No excuse this time. No engine trouble, no pretense. She stepped inside holding her phone, her coat half-buttoned, like she'd left in a hurry. "I shouldn't be here," she said immediately. "Then why are you?" I asked, before I could stop myself. She froze at the question, her lips parting, and for a second I thought she'd turn around and walk right back out. But instead, she crossed the floor, set her phone on the workbench, and slid it toward me. The screen lit up with a voicemail notification. "Listen," she said quietly. I hesitated. This was hers, not mine. But the look in her eyes left me no choice. I pressed play. A man's voice filled the shop. Older, tired, but pleading in a way that sent a shiver through me. "I know I wasn't enough. I know I failed you. But I don't know how to stop trying. Please just call me back." The message ended, the silence heavier than the words had been. I set the phone down carefully. "Your husband?" She nodded once, her jaw tight. For the first time, she looked smaller, stripped of the poise she always carried like armor. "He keeps apologizing. Keeps trying to make me forgive him. But I can't. And yet, his silence when I don't answer, it haunts me." Her hand trembled as she reached for the phone. I noticed the faint scar along her ring finger, barely visible but there, as though time itself had tried and failed to erase a promise. "You remind me of him," she said suddenly. Her voice was steady, but the words felt like they cracked something open between us. I blinked. Me? Not who he became, who he was before. The way he looked at me like I mattered. The way silence wasn't empty, but full. You do that without even trying. I didn't know how to answer. My chest felt tight, caught between wanting to offer comfort and realizing I was tangled in something far bigger than I understood. All I managed was, "I'm not him." She met my eyes then, sharp and searching, as if testing whether she wanted that to be true. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of what she'd said pressing down like the storm clouds gathering outside. Her phone buzzed again. She silenced it without looking at the screen, and this time she didn't apologize. She just whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe that's why I'm here." The words settled deep, quiet but earth-shaking, and I knew nothing between us could go back to how it was. She didn't come for 2 weeks. Long enough for me to imagine she'd decided to cut the thread between us. Long enough for me to convince myself that maybe distance was the right thing, even if it felt like losing something I hadn't even been given. Then one evening, just before closing, I heard the familiar sound of her car outside. She didn't bring the phone this time. No evidence, no excuses. Just herself. "You're still here," she said softly. "Always," I answered, trying to sound like it didn't matter. But it did. She stepped in, closing the door behind her. The air in the shop was warm, heavy with the scent of oil and rain-soaked air drifting in. She didn't sit this time. She just stood there, her coat damp at the shoulders, her eyes carrying the exhaustion of too many nights awake. "I can't keep pretending this is nothing," she said, her voice low, stripped of all its defenses. I froze, the rag in my hand useless. My mouth opened, then closed. She wasn't asking me for words, not really. "I don't know what I want," she continued, her breath catching on the last word. "But I know I don't want to keep disappearing into silence. Not anymore." I stepped closer, slow enough for her to move if she wanted. She didn't. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady now, though her hands trembled where she gripped her coat. "No declarations," she whispered, half to herself. "Just this. Just being here." So I did the only thing I could. I set the rag down, closed the space between us until I could feel her presence like a current. My hand found hers, not dramatic, not possessive, just resting there, palm against palm. Her fingers curled almost instinctively, like she'd been waiting for that anchor. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us had always been louder than words, but now it felt different, no longer haunting, no longer heavy with regret. Just alive. She leaned slightly, enough that her forehead brushed against mine. The smallest gesture, but it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. Her breath mingled with mine, warm, unsteady, real. We stood like that for a long moment. Two people who had circled each other through silence, regret, and longing, now simply existing in the same space without running. When she finally pulled back, her hand still in mine, she gave the faintest smile. Not bright, not triumphant, just tired, honest. "This is enough," she said quietly. And for the first time, I believed it. I think about that night more often than I admit. Not because something dramatic happened, not because there was some sweeping declaration or grand gesture, but because for the first time, the silence between us wasn't unbearable. It wasn't a wall. It was a place to rest. Looking back, I realize I didn't fall for her in the way stories usually tell it. There was no single spark, no sudden knowing. It was slower, quieter. A pull that built in the space between glances, in the moments where words stopped just short of being spoken. She was older, yes. Wiser, more guarded. She carried her regrets like invisible luggage. And me? I carried longing, the need to be seen. Somehow, those two weights found balance in the same room. What changed wasn't the fact that we touched hands, or leaned close, or chose to stay in that silence together. What changed was that she let herself not be strong, not just for a moment, and I let myself be enough without asking for more. That was the lesson neither of us expected. Love, if that's even the word for it, doesn't always announce itself with fire. Sometimes it arrives as a fragile piece, earned in half-lit rooms and unfinished sentences. Did we end up together? That's not the point. What mattered was that we crossed some invisible line where we could no longer deny what was real. She taught me that silence isn't always empty, that sometimes it holds the truest things we're afraid to say. And me? I learned that wanting to be seen and actually being seen are two very different things. One aches, the other heals. Even now, whenever the rain hits the shop roof just right, I remember the way she whispered, "This is enough." And maybe that's the most honest ending any story like ours could have. Not perfect, not complete, just enough. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?